Hello everyone, Loremaster Sotek here, and we're back with Ogre Kingdoms Q&A. We're actually very close to the end of this, so I am just gonna kind of record as many of these as I can in a few sit-downs, and that way we can get to the end of the series, and I can just have them uploaded in advance, and I can start getting to work on the next subject matter, which we're gonna have to figure out pretty soon, so I hope you're all looking forward to finding out what that's gonna be, because I don't know yet, but we'll figure that out. In any event, let's go ahead and dive into today's questions. Our first one is from Mr. Pig, and he asks, besides the Sceptre of Titans, what else did the ogres scavenge from the Sky Titans? Obviously there's the Iron Blasters, which are those massive cannons carried by the Rhinox that have an ogre crewman. Those are literally just guns taken from the Sky Titans. We've already talked about those in the past. But the only other magic item worth of note is called the Thunder Mace. And it's just this big, massive chunk of rock taken from the foundation stone of Sky Castle, which were the homes of the Sky Titans. And it's bound with meteoric iron to this huge tree trunk. And basically, when this thing is swung overhead by an ogre, because it would take something at least the strength of like an ogre tyrant to wield, this multi-ton weapon, when it hits the ground, it explodes with so much force that it basically causes a thunderclap that is loud enough to cause avalanches and just can obliterate. Shockwaves are pretty dangerous. That's probably one of the biggest things you learn when you're learning about science or history and warfare and stuff like that, is it's really easy to underestimate how dangerous shockwaves are. And this is a weapon that specializes in that. You just land it in the middle of a big block of infantry and the shockwave will pretty much just kill a bunch of people. But, ogres can take it, apparently. And your second question is, are there any other notable items that the ogres paid to have made, like the Overtyrant's crown, or is that the only one? That's the only one we know of. There is a technical exception in the mechanical monstrosity that the Ogre Tyrant Gork Ironskin rides, which was forged for him by the Chaos Dwarfs. I don't think he commissioned that, though, so to speak. I believe that was a gift to him. But we've talked about how Gork rides basically a colossal mechanical Rhinox. It's very similar to, like, if you want to look up a Corn Juggernaut, which is like a monster made of brass and fire and stuff. That's basically what he rides, but it's much bigger because it's Rhinox-sized. Because, an ogre's got to fit on it. And then your last question is, how were there enough ogres to take out the Sky Titans if so many of them died from the comet that transformed into the Great Maw, and then from the exodus to the mountains? Or was it just a case that there was just enough because? Because surely even if they could take out the Titans through numbers, many ogres would have died in each battle just due to the sheer size of the Titans. Okay, so the main issue with the Sky Titans is that even before the ogres arrived, there were very, very few of them. You have to remember that, like many of the races created by the old ones, the Great Cataclysm had happened fairly recently in, like, the global span of things. I want to say it had only been, like, in the ballpark of, like, 5,000 years or something. I'd have to double-check the exact dates. But the Sky Titans, like many races, suffered pretty badly during the Great Catastrophe, due to, warpstone raining from the sky and chaos being unleashed on the world, which created the Beastmen and a bunch of other horrible stuff. And it was just like complete mass chaos and anarchy. And demons were everywhere all the time. It was possible to push them back for a little while and earn yourself maybe a few decades of peace, but they would always come back. And no doubt the Sky Titans were on the front line of that, at least in their area, though they probably didn't attract a lot of attention from the demons. No doubt they had to fight something, so that's worth taking into account. But we've always known that there were a handful of them left in existence. I would say, like, on the optimistic side of things, there were probably maybe 30 to 50 Sky Titans, period. Like, their entire race, 30 to 50 guys. Not excluding the Giants of Albion, which are a different idea. The thing about the Sky Titans, though, is that they were so incredibly isolated and solitary that each one of them had to basically fight the entire ogre race one on however many there were. As for the ogres' actual numbers, it seems very likely the ogres, based on what we know about them in their promised land, the place where the old ones designed them to be, they were flourishing, right? They were a threat to Grand Cathay, which is a hell of an empire. So there were at least millions and millions of ogres. They'd been there for a very long time. You know what? I actually did write it down. Chaos had been defeated for about 2,000 years. So not quite 5,000, but if anything, that just goes to show the point. So the ogres had 2,000 years to bounce back their population, or to expand their population beyond what the old ones initially designed. Meanwhile, the Sky Titans remained almost certainly fairly stagnant. So you have this perfect environment for them, and the ogres, we know, are quite a... I'm not sure what the word is for it, but they repopulate very quickly. Ogres are like humans. They're able to breed very, very fast. So let's take a conservative estimate and say that the entirety of the ogre race in their ancient homeland was like 3 million ogres, right? So the Great Maw impacts, and we know that 2/3, roughly, of the ogre race were annihilated in an instant. So that still would leave 1 million ogres left. And 1 million ogres versus maybe 50 titans? That means every single titan would have to account for, like, hundreds of, like, every titan would have to account for, what, 100, maybe 200,000 ogres? That's insane! Like, that's such an unmatched fight. Even if you're having ogres dying due to the initial nastiness of their environment, they left for the ancient giant lands pretty quick, like within a handful of years, and started battling the Sky Titans. There were just way too many of them. They were just so hilariously outnumbered that you have to remember that if you have, I said 100,000 earlier. I should have said 10,000. My math is, whatever. It doesn't matter. You get the idea. Every Sky Titan would have needed to kill a truly absurd amount of ogres. Even with the ability to, like, unleash magical avalanches and build technological marvels that would fire cannons and, like, could obliterate dozens of ogres per blast. That's still a drop in the ocean for how many ogres you have to kill. And the thing about the Sky Titans is you have to remember, they didn't know the ogres were coming. The Sky Titans lived in a kingdom above the world. You had to go so far up the mountains to get to the Sky Titans that you would need to you'd have to climb the mountains until you went above the clouds, and then in the land above the clouds is where their kingdom was. It was like a land separated from the rest of the planet because it was so high up. And the Sky Titans had spent thousands of years completely undisturbed since the fall of Chaos, or Chaos had been contained at least. And so they weren't expecting any visitors. They weren't expecting any genuine threats. Nothing was really a threat to them, maybe besides like a super powerful monster, but they had ways to deal with like individual problems like that because they were magically and technologically powerful creatures. But suddenly you have literally 1 million little monsters show up and you just get completely overwhelmed. There's nothing you can do against that. And they weren't ready. And the thing about the ogres is that there were so few Sky Titans that once the war started, so from the first time the ogres became aware of the actual Sky Titans, like they had started killing the the mammoths, which were the food supply for the Titans, and the Titans noticed them and started fighting them. From that moment to the end of the war was a decade. 10 years, that's it. It took 10 years for the ogres to systematically wipe out the entirety of the Sky Titan race, for the most part. You know, for the actual fight to be over. And that's just crazy. Even if you had the Titans fight side by side, which they didn't, they always fought completely by themselves. It would have been an impossible task. The Sky Titans would have needed to be literal gods to stop that many ogres from just completely overwhelming them. Because even though they are that big and colossal, that doesn't necessarily grant them infinite advantages, because the ogres are so powerful, numerous, and they had really nasty abilities and durability in their own right. You know, sure, like a dozen of them could be wiped out, but when you have ogres that can hit so hard, especially like the larger tyrants, that they could shatter a Sky Titan's ankle with a single blow, as long as they could get to him. And inevitably that's going to happen, just because they'd be surrounded on all sides, and eventually they're just going to get overwhelmed and killed. It's just so hopefully that makes sense. That, you know, sure, they were able to take down hundreds, maybe thousands of ogres with every single attack, but with every Sky Titan that died, the ogres got more efficient at killing the Sky Titans, and were also looting their sky castles and taking their inventions to use as weapons. I just don't really see a way they could have come out on top in the first place. Sorry, that was a really long-winded answer to that, but let's move on. Jeremy Coiler already answered that. Thanks for the question. Faba, how strong is the average ogre? Already answered that. Thanks for asking. Feather Freaks. Besides the one we know of in the army roster, what can you tell us about the other beasts that reside in the areas around the mountains of Mourn? So I would say the TLDR to this is that they're the creatures in and around the mountains of Mourn that are not directly used by the ogres are a smorgasbord of terrifying and unstoppable primordial monsters of ancient ice and darkness. Don't go there unless you just want to die. Probably the most notable monsters that you're going to see a lot of are things like cockatrices, chimera, frost dragons, manticores, and generally pretty much any monster that likes living in mountains, subterranean lairs, frosty areas, or is like a large chaos monster that needs a lot of like meat and violence to exist. Those are all going to be found in spades. But, and that's not even including the actual living mountains and moving glaciers that are actively trying to kill and devour anything they find. So yeah, not a great place. Grant Jacobson. What would happen if the Great Maw was filled in? Assuming that was even possible. What if, like, gods or stuff did it? Assuming that is possible, would it affect the ogres at all? Or is the Great Maw become a metaphysical concept that would persist even if its mortal incarnation were destroyed? So, the only possible way I could see the Great Maw being destroyed would be through an incredibly delicate but insanely powerful ritual or machine. As in, because the thing about the Hungering God is he is burrowed through the entire earth, right? It's made a complete hole all the way through. So if you destroyed it recklessly, like say with a Skaven Doomsday engine, it would probably destroy the planet. Like anything you could throw at the Great Maw that would actually kill it would probably just cause the actual planet to break apart, and it would be an apocalyptic scenario. So that would be a no. That would just be the death of everything. Assuming it could even be done, the Great Maw has devoured so much death and magic and has literally become a vortex for, like, especially dark magic in and of its own self, that it may well have the power to fight back against the likes of the Dark Gods, or any of the other pantheons. So I don't think there's any singular god that could just one-shot him or reliably take him out, it would take a coalition of powers. The best method I could think of for destroying the Great Maw, like hypothetical scenario, would be that you would need the Slann to basically, with the help of the younger races, completely restore the geomantic web. Like completely fix it, which would also require, because that basically would create this massive network of reliable, stable magic. Then for the sheer size of the ritual you'd need to cast, you would want to get rid of the Chaos Moon. You'd have to dispel the Chaos Moon first and foremost, to make sure that it's not interfering with the actual winds of magic themselves, which would also require the defeat of Chaos to even remotely accomplish that task. If you could pull that off. So you've dealt with all of the big Chaos races to at least restore the geomantic web to full power, and you've gotten rid of Morcelib, then the Slann could probably lead a coalition of human, elven, and mages and dwarven rune lords in a worldwide ritual that could dispel the physical embodiment of the Great Maw, at least to the extent that it would fall apart or starve or die, and would no longer be a threat to the planet. So that would require just an incalculable amount of effort. Like, you basically would have to defeat Chaos just to even get at the Great Maw. Because the Great Maw kind of cheats in that it has a physical form that is literally lodged in the planet. So it's just super dangerous to get rid of. Yeah, no. that would be the best method to actually kill it would probably be to try and just seal off both ends of its mouths. But one of them is the initial mouth, which is the actual Great Maw itself, which is miles wide, so good fucking luck with that. And the other one is the largest whirlpool in the entirety of the ocean, which I don't understand how you would plug a whirlpool. You'd have to, like, get another miles wide cork and shove it into the bottom of the ocean floor, which is just not going to happen. So yeah, no, it's pretty much impossible to get rid of. And even if you did get rid of it, its power would still exist as long as the ogres continued to worship it. Like, it would still have a presence, at least in the realm of chaos. It would be a mess. And then your other question is, given that the lore of the Great Maw was apparently a manifestation of Gork and Mork, okay, so that is actually not fantasy. That's Age of Sigmar. So in Age of Sigmar, they have exclusively changed the way gods work, in that for destruction races, so like ogres, greenskins like goblins, which are called grots, and orcs, which are called urks, and giants, which are now called gargants, all of those races have gods, but all of their gods are things that are either a part of or were created by Gorka Morka, who is Gork and Mork combined into a single entity, and sometimes he splits apart and goes back to being Gork and Mork, and it's a whole thing. But basically, the Great Maw in fantasy has nothing to do with Gork and Mork. They are completely distinct entities. Whereas in Age of Sigmar, there's a lot of interweaving there. So hopefully that answers that. PJ Husser, Petruki Ibiza. We already answered most of these questions. But okay. Ibiza does have two questions that are kind of a little different. First one, what do ogres think about rat ogres and dragon ogres? Second one is, is there anything ogres won't eat? What about Nurgle creatures? So first one, we've already talked a lot about dragon ogres, but rat ogres are... The only thing that ogres think about rat ogres is that they're a better meal because they have more meat on them. That's the only thing they think when they see rat ogres. And Nurgle stuff, no, they will literally eat anything. Even the pus-ridden, slime-covered minions of Nurgle are still on the menu for ogres. Brendan Packheiser, how the hell did Grimgor beat Greasus Goldtooth? An absolute damn miracle. And also using his own weapon against him. That's how. Yo-Yo Boyo already answered that. Thanks for asking. Feather Freaks. First question, where do the ogres get their weapons besides the Chaos Dwarfs? I mean, a dwarven two-handed great axe would basically be a small hand weapon for an ogre, right? So where do they get those really big two-handed weapons like the Iron Guts have? So ogres have enough of a crude crafting skill to basically make their own weapons and armor, so long as the base materials are provided by the scraps they've looted from their enemies. Iron Guts, for instance, will almost always make their own weapons unless they can afford some kind of foreign smith or artisan because their tribe is particularly wealthy, like the Goldtooth tribe. But most of them will basically just take like big hunks of metal, like iron, and will just forcefully bend it into a good shape, or will, you know, just hammer it until it's roughly the shape they want, and they'll just like strap it onto a big hunk of Mourn wood. But trust me, there's a very big reason why almost all ogre weapons are some form of like metal forcefully shaped around their bodies, like an iron fist, or are clubs. Those are like basically the only ogre weapons that they make on their own, but they also make up 90% of their roster. Everything else they get from like trading or stealing from others. That being said, there is a slight tangent worth giving, and that has to do with man-eaters. Because man-eaters have very eloquent, interesting weapons that were clearly designed by somebody, but they're still ogre-sized. And the way that happens is that many ogre mercenaries form a very positive relationship with their employers, whether their employers be elves, dwarves, men, etc. These same employers very often will happily grant their new colossal allies very specially crafted weapons so that they can be much more effective troops. Especially, they would rather give them something like really big and scary over just a club. If you're really relying on those ogres to like come in your flank and destroy the enemy or hold the center against something that your troops like really need time to be peppering the enemy with gunpowder, you're gonna outfit those ogres with armor and like scary weapons so that they don't die. Especially because you're paying a lot for those guys. You need to make sure that you get your money's worth out of them. And that's actually why man-eaters tend to reflect the culture of whoever they fight for so long. You know, if you have a man-eater who got hired on by a dwarf hold and he worked there for, decades, he very well could have a Gromral gut plate or some kind of massive two-handed rune hammer and like a really nice helmet that actually protects him from, high quality fire. Or if you have an ogre who worked or lived in the high elven port of Lothern for many years and fought against the many foes who try and attack the elves, he might be granted like a masterfully crafted immense two-handed greatsword that's flawlessly balanced, and he's gifted like really nice robes that function both as surprisingly durable armor and as a reusable napkin. Or those from the Empire might have an ogre-sized brace of pistols and be wearing like full plate armor over their entire body, and really, really big hats with like huge feathers from griffins sticking out of them for ornamentation. Or if you have an ogre who, for whatever reason, signed up with some Tomb Kings, maybe they wandered into their lands and struck a deal, or have been consistently being useful to a Tomb King, he might take them on as subjects, and that guy might have a huge stone club that's like really intricate, crafted by a necrotech to unleash death curses, or have like really interesting armor forged from the bones of like fallen soldiers who are no longer able to be remade, so that he like stands out, fits in the army, and is protected by them. There is literally a endless amount of awesome or terrifying equipment you could find on a man-eater, and those also spread around, but generally it depends on the tribe. And then we've already answered that one. And the next question, since the east to them is the steppes of the Hobgoblins, I always want to say steeps when I see that, but I've been informed it's steppes. How often do the two races interact, and how? Ogres do not like hobgoblins. Nobody likes hobgoblins. Even the Chaos Dwarfs do not like hobgoblins that much. Hobgoblins have a very well-established relationship as absolutely horrid backstabbers. Skaven are vaguely more trustworthy than hobgoblins are. Plus, the Gnoblars, who the ogres are actually tolerant of and put up with, are very, very hateful towards and terrified of hobgoblins. They really don't like hobgoblins, which doesn't help at all. And the thing about hobgoblins is they fall into that category of they're a little bit too big for their own good when it comes to ogres. Hobgoblins and especially their giant wolves are large enough that the only thing an ogre is probably gonna think when seeing those gits is like, oh, the food. that's really gonna be it. Thanks for the questions. Desert Fox. Why were the ogres created and what purpose are they supposed to serve? Also, just want to say thank you for the nice words. So, purpose of the ogres, they were literally created as a last-ditch effort to make a race that was very resistant to chaos, so that they could serve as really powerful troops to hopefully build a civilization and armies capable of defeating chaos and killing the dark gods themselves. Obviously, to say that they are half-baked is a grotesque understatement. Eddie Ed, are there any independent Gnoblar tribes? Yes, they live in shanty towns or in cave networks that are too small for the ogres to enter in the mountains of Mourn. Some tribes really don't like Gnoblars, others adore them. It just depends on the tribe. 2. Do Gnoblars worship the Great Maw, or do they worship Gork and Mork like other greenskins? They seem to be heavily on Team Great Maw to avoid potential clashes with the ogres, and especially the butchers. So I believe they're on Team Great Maw, but you might find exceptions, but I'm pretty sure about that one. Infected Umbrella Grunt. Infected Umbrella... Oh, okay, like zombies, got it. Infected Umbrella Grunt. Is an ogre's body mostly comprised of body fat or muscle? It's actually mostly muscle, it just has a very generous helping of fat on top. Jake! Ogre versus Troll, who wins? If an ogre ate a troll, will we get an ogre version of Grom the Paunch? In an ogre versus troll fight, most of the time the troll's gonna win, just because the regeneration is just ridiculous. The ogres can't top that in a one-on-one fight, and no, ogre digestion's too good for that. Mr. No Name 145, were ogres designed by the old ones to be the amalgamation of the best characteristics / strengths of humans and dwarves, or were they something completely new and left unfinished? We don't know. We have no idea. The old ones created the ogres only... The ogres and halflings, to give an idea of how, like, fresh they were only created 100 years, roughly, before the Great Catastrophe. So before the polar gates collapsed and the old ones vanished. So we have no idea. The lizardmen have no idea. Nobody knows. It seems most likely that they were just completely unfinished. Like, basically, they got the ball rolling, and then the fighting in the realm of the warp gates, which are kind of like a separate form of reality that the realm of chaos is able to leech through. The old ones were probably doing a ton of fighting in there against the forces of chaos, trying to defeat the dark gods and hold the demons back. So they never had time to come back and finish it before it was too late. Travis Bruno, do ogres know about dwarves and Skaven? Yes, they fight a lot. Jack Schaefer, how the hell do ogre stomachs work? I don't know, I'm not a freaking biologist. Get off my back. Magic. The only thing we know for sure is that most of their internal organs are contained in their stomachs. Like, the actual outer portion of their guts. And that their stomachs are god tier. I don't know how it works. Magic. Magic. There's your answer. Magic. Alexander Hernander. When the ogre army goes on the march, is there a rank order structure, or does it just work as a giant mob like greenskins? It's like greenskins. They kind of just... The ogres tend to bring their entire tribes with them wherever they go, not like large marching armies. So they don't care. Ogres do not care for structure or order, other than being sure to listen to whoever's in charge. So like the tyrant makes sure that everybody listens to him, and the bruisers make sure they listen to the tyrant, and everybody also listens to them. That's it. And we've talked extensively about ogre politics. Lucas Schuler, thanks for the question. Already answered it. Eisen2468. How do... Oh, already answered. That was like... I was like, did I write that response? It's like, oh wait, no, this is like a copy pasta. We already answered that. Thanks, though. Poi Pork. Already answered. Oh wait, no. I answered one of these. Okay, in what ways do ogres stand out from orcs? They always just seemed like less green, hungrier orcs. So, the thing about ogres is that they are much bigger and much fatter than orcs. They're also, the big thing though, is that they're also far less likely to beat you to death just for the fun of it, and are much more motivated by food than violence. Greenskins are purely motivated by violence, whereas ogres are motivated by food. Two very different ideologies that have those, are surprisingly importantly different. Although they have a lot in common, at the end of the day, an ogre is happy to live and let live. Like, as long as the ogre is able to eat, or he's able to get paid or whatever, he can happily live in any society. Orcs, that is not the case. They're gonna want to like crush and just circle beat everything. Let's see. Decidia. Who is the most famous Gorger, if there is one? Famous Gorger? The only one I can think of is there was like a Gorger king that kind of there was like an alpha Gorger that dueled Scrag the Slaughterer, and Scrag famously tore out its throat with his own teeth since his hands had been chopped off and devoured by his angry tyrant earlier. So all the Gorgers now follow Scrag as king. That's the only one I can think of, unless you watched the If the Emperor Had a Text-to-Speech Device episode on Warhammer Fantasy RPG. I won't spoil that, but you should go watch that. It technically has a Gorger king. Next question. Armando Patino. Do ogres commit sexual assault? Is there such thing as a half ogre in Warhammer Fantasy battle? And in a food fight to eat the most, who would win? Grom the Paunch or Greasus? I don't believe ogres do. There is rape in Warhammer Fantasy. It is a part of the setting. Very, very big with beastmen and Slaanesh, just anything Slaanesh, but very big with beastmen. But ogres, no. Ogres have no interest in it. They are not a very lustful species. They seem to only engage in acts of procreation for the sake of procreation. I'm sure it's vaguely enjoyable to them, but food is literally all that matters. Ogres are the kind of guys that would rather eat in bed, because to them, having food in your bed is better than, like, being able to enjoy the experience with your partner, which for humans is not the case, at least for those of us that are sane. But yeah, no. Ogres would not... I've never heard of ogres engaging in an activity like that, because they're literally only motivated by eating. And then in a food fight, yeah, no, Greasus would not only completely dunk on Grom as far as being able to out-eat him, but Greasus could not, like, Greasus would eat all the food for the challenge and then could turn and eat Grom as a dessert and still have room. So, yeah. Connor Brennan. First question, what do the Ogre Kingdoms think of the Undead factions? Generally much less enjoyable to eat due to an overall lack of freshness, if they even have meat on them, though bone meal is something ogres are aware of and are more than happy to deal with, or at least, you know, bone marrow is still there, even if you're fighting wights and skeletons. But they don't seem terribly bothered by the concept of undeath, which many races are. You know, a lot of races are like scared of the undead because it makes them think of their own mortality, or it's like super violating to their beliefs and how they believe the dead should be treated. Ogres don't care. Food's food. Like the dead getting up and walking, they're just like, oh, okay, like I guess we're just having this for dinner now. Are ogre mercenaries considered rare among undead factions? Yes, but that's not because of ogres. The reason ogres are very, very rare to see in like the entourage of vampires or necromancers or tomb kings or anything is much more due to the fact that the undead tend to be so colossally arrogant, regardless of what kind of undead it is, or secretive in the case of certain ones, that it's just very rare to find anything under their employ that has free will. You know, for them, an ogre would be kind of annoying because they would have to take into account the ogre's needs. So like the ogre's like, hey, I want to keep eating. And like every time he's eating corpses, that's literally getting rid of raw materials. So most of the time they're just gonna kill the ogre and raise his corpse. You know, if you play Vampire Coast, that's what they do. The hulking, the hulkers, I forget what they're called all of a sudden, the dead hulks or whatever they are, animated hulks, there we go. They are literally ogres. They're ogres that have sea creatures inside of their dead corpses, but they're ogres. Eric Hernandez already answered that. Thanks for the question. Hardy, are there any notable cases of employers refusing to pay their ogre mercenaries? If so, what were the consequences? Yes, it happens all the time. People trying to like get one over on the ogres, and it never goes well. At the bare minimum, it has always resulted in the attempted devouring of the one responsible. So if you're the paymaster and you don't pay your ogres, they're going to eat you. I cannot think of a time that the ogre has not succeeded when they get cheated. Like, I think almost every story that involves ogres being shortchanged or whatever, and them attempting to devour the person responsible, they have never failed in that task. It tends to be a good life or death lesson. Don't cheat your ogres, kids. That they will not put up with it. George Campos. First question, is there anything organic an ogre won't eat? No. There's nothing an ogre won't try to eat, at least. Are there... second question, are there swamp ogres? If so, would they tell people to get out of their swamp? Probably, and probably not. They would just eat them. Can you tell us... third question, can you tell us about those rejected baby ogres that get tossed in the caves? Oh, we already answered that. We talked about the Gorgers. Fourth question, is it possible to be good friends with an ogre? Yes, though it would never be wise to trust them on an empty stomach. And we already answered your fifth question. Master Westy. Are ogres intelligent? I know they're not human smart, but they work with other races and some have shown tactical abilities. How are they compared to other races? Probably the best way to describe ogres is that they're like humans with a very notable learning disability. They can be surprisingly adept at very specific issues, and on the other hand, super duper easy to trick. But they almost never fall for the same trick twice. While they're definitely not smart, do not underestimate an ogre's ability to comprehend something when it comes to them getting paid or eating. I would say on average, they're fairly similar in intelligence to like a notably clever orc. Not like Gorfang Rotgut level intelligence, but like somewhere below that. You know, ogres, they're not idiots. They have a very focused form of intelligence. What do they call that? Like an idiot savant, I think is the old-fashioned term for it. Where it's like generally they seem to just be kind of like not very smart, but when it comes to like them getting what they want, oh boy, you better watch out. Next up, Dumvlag Katul. Have ogres ever fought dwarves in the mountains of Mourn? Yes, there are a number of very well hidden dwarf settlements established in the mountains of Mourn, especially since there are many rumors in the dwarven realms of a mystical mountain somewhere in the mountains of Mourn that's made of pure gold. So the dwarves have very aggressively been seeking that. It's kind of their El Dorado. But, I mean, just in general, the mines in the mountains of Mourn have just insane amounts of, like, gems and rare metals and gold. Like, it's a dwarf's, like, best dream. The problem is you have to go across the Darklands and deal with the ogres to get it. So most dwarves genuinely do not consider it worth the effort. Ogres very eagerly seek out dwarf settlements with extreme prejudice. as they know that if they can find like a dwarf mine or a hold or something, it is going to be very good for loot and food. And then your other question, lastly, what's the ogre's relation with Cathay? Well, in the modern day, it's a lot better than it was about 7,000 years ago when Cathay dropped a meteor on them. It's very difficult for ogres to even get to Cathay, as it's a very long road from the mountains of Mourn. And the Ogre Kingdoms do not have a single port or naval vessel in existence to speak of. They always, like, hitch with somebody else. So getting to Cathay for them is kind of impractical. The only time they tend to go there is when they are basically the bodyguard for, like, people that are navigating the trade routes. So they don't go there super often, but Cathay doesn't mind them as long as they don't, like, attack or abuse the Cathayan people. Caleb Bathhouse. If the ogres were to be able to become food critics in the world, when you say this world, do you mean our world or their world? I'm gonna assume you mean their world, but I'll answer it both ways just in case. Who do you think ogres would appreciate the most? Well, I'll say in the Warhammer Fantasy world, hands down the Moot. If the ogres were hosting like an Iron Chef challenge, the halflings would win every single year. In our world, I would think in our world, I have a sneaking suspicion that ogres would probably really like South Asian, like the continent of Asia, places like India or any of those southeastern countries, because they tend to be really big on using like a ton of meat with a lot of spices in really like creative ways. So that would probably really get their attention. Ogres would probably really like America, just because of the sheer quantity of food. I'm a fat guy, and I've been to England. I've seen the difference between portion sizes, and it's noticeable. So I don't know, maybe America would be their favorite. You have to remember that ogres don't really care as much about flavor. They care much more about quantity, as long as the quality is like above like disease giving. Oh wow, I went way over time. Okay, so that's gonna be the end of this episode. Like I said, we are rapidly approaching the end, so I'm just gonna keep recording, but I need to stop this episode and start working on tomorrow's. So thanks so much for watching, guys. See you next time.